Welcome to podcast number 69 for Thanks for Your Service. Our focus is on historical topics relating to the Australian military. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Just search for Thanks for Your Service. Our website is www.thanksforyourservice.net and you can email us at info@thanksforyourservice.net. Our next guest gives us a remarkable insight into the Australian Army's vital, yet probably least known units, the Unrecovered War Casualties Army. Major Cameron Clarke joins us to tell us more. So Cameron, you must belong to one of the Army's least known but vitally important units. What is the unit?
Yes, David. So the unit is called the Unrecovered War Casualty Army, or UWCA for short. Makes it a bit easier to say. And it is, it's not a well-known unit within the Army and outside of the Army. But I think why that is because the success we have, we want to share that with the greater Army. We don't need to have the spotlight on us. It's about the Army and, more importantly, the Australian government, the Australian community working towards identifying our war dead. So our work is probably well known, and we'll talk about some of the successes we've had later on if you want to ask about that. But the actual Army name for our team is not that well known.
When was the unit formed?
So it was formed in 2010. Prior to that, any work that came up, if remains were found or to be investigated, and this was particularly the case in around Malaysia and Vietnam, the Army History Unit, which is still around today, they sort of seemed to be the best fit to sort of, and there was a couple of specialists amongst that. Jack Thurger, who was also ex-AFP, used to sort of have a heavy hand in doing those investigations. And then in 2010, the Army thought that there's enough scope to actually mandate a dedicated team, and hence the UWCA was formed.
Where are you based? Or where is the unit based?
Yeah, so we're based out of Canberra. The UWCA answers straight to the Chief of Army's office, and the headquarters is there. However, most of the people, I talk about this if we talk about the structure of the unit, most people are specialists, either investigators or specialist scientists and capability. And as you can imagine, that requires us to be all around the country. So the actual headquarters is in the Chief of Army's building. However, most people are around the country.
And how big is the unit, Cameron?
So it's only small. It fluctuates in size. It's definitely under about 20 full-time, as in permanent members, and 3 public servants. So there's 3 actual permanent staff who are public servants, the manager, and then it's broken up into 2 areas that we cover. Asia Pacific, so there's a public servant sort of responsible for managing the work that comes in for that, and also Europe and Africa is the other sort of geographical area where we have a public servant looking after those areas as well. But within the unit, so the rest are uniformed, all Army reservists, and it's broken up into 2 sections. So we've got the investigation side, who are all investigators like myself, who are either usually current or former serving investigators, usually police or detectives or other investigative sort of government bodies. So that's the investigation side of things. And then the other half are what we call the specialists. So they're all, might be anthropologists or archaeologists, forensic dentists, DNA experts. And I remember the first time that I joined the team, and a couple of months later, I went to the annual conference. It was the first time I'd sort of got everyone, I'd met everyone, and I could tell you I felt pretty inadequate because, being a sort of layperson, ex-regular Army and then the federal police, with just sort of a normal academic backgrounds, then all of a sudden, my teammates were professors or senior lecturers at well-established universities within their field of endeavour, being all the specialists. So I just remember thinking, wow, there's some there's some brain power amongst this team. I was pretty impressed.
What's the role, Cameron? What does the unit do?
So first and foremost, it just carries on what the Army and Defence Force say is we never forget our war dead. And if we ever can and have the opportunity, we will always, we'll never cease to look for our war dead and hopefully try to identify our war dead and give them some type of dignified either burial or commemoration service when we can. So that's our overall, bigger picture. But what we do today, I'll go back a step. So in 2010 and prior to our inception as a unit, we were there usually reactionary. So some remains might have been found in New Guinea or in Malaysia or on the Western Front in Europe, and it'd be formed to just try and identify those remains. As time's gone on, our mandates got wider. So now our team is largely responsible sort of for three avenues of work. One of those is still responsive. So if remains are found in, particularly now, Papua New Guinea and in, Belgium or France from World War One, if there's a belief that there could be a unrecovered Australian serviceman, then we will investigate that. And obviously with the anthropologists, we'll conduct a review to try and give us an age of the serviceman and the height and all those type of sort of evidence that would help us identify. And then other specialists doing their things, DNA will try and sort of get a candidate list to do family tree histories, track down living relatives and do all that. And on the investigator side, you're there to hopefully narrow down a candidate pool. So knowing where that set of remains was found, because particularly in the World War One battles, we still have over 1,000 Australians might be unrecovered from that couple of square kilometres. And it's not like the movies where we can instantly get DNA profiles or whatnot, even to track down one living family member to request for them to provide a DNA sample is onerous. So to start with, to have a candidate pool of 1,000 would take forever. So hopefully, given what artefacts might have been found and knowing what units were there, as the role as an investigator, you might be able to hopefully narrow down that candidate list to something small and workable and hopefully get about it. So that's one avenue. The other one is the proactive sort of work. So if we work on a particular area, it might be the Battle of Bullecourt, for example, and over time we might do a lot of sort of plotting of where we last think that they might have, our Australian servicemen who are still unrecovered might be, and we plot. And then if we got a concentrated area and we had some other circumstantial evidence, we might go and do commission a survey of the ground itself to look for, any anomalies or anything like that might lead us to go on a proactive dig for, if we thought there was going to be numerous unrecovered Australians in that area. So that's proactive, and that's obviously very long term. There's a lot of resources and planning going to doing that. So that's not something we do every day, but it is ongoing in a few different areas. And then the last thing we've moved into in the last couple of years, which is becoming more and more common, is what we call headstone investigations. Because we still have thousands, we don't know the exact number in particularly Western Europe, because some of the unknowns are listed as unknown Commonwealth soldier or unknown soldier, but within the vicinity of 10,000 Australians may lay in a grave, but in an unknown grave. So obviously that grave is a serviceman. So we try to, where we can, identify a grave to an actual serviceman. And I just make the point that we can't actually do that without a lot of work from other volunteer historical groups. And I'll mention the Fallen Diggers as being our sort of biggest producer of initial work, who do line up the initial submission. Will have some information about a certain grave and they will put forward a submission, and then it comes to the UWCA to sort of further that investigation and submit that before a tribunal. And if all circumstantial evidence was, at a high enough threshold, because we look at, concentration records from graves registration units to Red Cross files where they interviewed lots and lots of servicemen, during and after the war, about fellow people within their company who they may have seen and asked where they were last seen on the battlefield. Those type of records, anything other sort of anecdotal records, and we can draw a picture and put a submission forward, and it's based on the balance of probabilities. So once this submission is put forward to a tribunal, it's only circumstantial evidence, and it's based on the balance of probabilities. But if they uphold the submission, then that headstone will be, the unknown soldier headstone will be removed, and those details will be ceremony, what they call a rededication ceremony, will be held. And although it doesn't seem to get the amount of publicity as where fresh remains are identified and given a burial, to me it is still a soldier who was lost for 100 years and who's now found, now has a known final resting place. So to me, it's just as important and just as rewarding doing these headstone investigations as doing any of the other type of work. And as it's turned out in the last 5 years, we've had, lots of success in slowly, identifying graves, one by one, and knowing, which Australian servicemen. And I have the pleasure of being able to, contact family members, throughout this process and at the end. And last year, I was actually involved in being the master of ceremonies for 17 of these ceremonies. And I can tell you that it's still usually a very, very strong part of that family history that, their great uncle, and it might be now, you're talking 3, even 4 generations removed from that young man killed in the Western Front, and 105 years or 106 years might have passed, but it's still fairly raw within their family about how their great uncle was killed, in a certain battle and was never found, and now has a known final resting place. So yeah.
Can you give us an example of a recovery project that you've been involved in recently?
So the one that comes to mind was a serviceman was found. So some council workers were digging a water pipe just outside of Ypres, which a lot of people would know, Menin Road, or the Menin Gate Memorial in Belgium, in a place called Zombecker. And they dug up a set of remains, fairly intact. It was obvious from the start, given the artifacts that were with the body, that it was an Australian serviceman. There was Rising Sun and badges and all those type of things. So I was given that investigation, and I became the case officer. But unfortunately, the Battle of Menin Road, and for those people who know about that, was, there's some 3,000 Australians killed over that period of time, and still over 1,000 Australians are unrecovered from that one area. Unfortunately, the anthropological, the anthro analysis was, your typical sort of soldier of the time, 5'3" to 5'8", 20 to 30 years of age. So all those sorts of initial information wasn't really sort of narrowing down the candidate pool. So I was faced with, a lot of potentials. We have a policy that after a few years, if we still haven't identified the remains, that they will be buried anyway, but they'll be given a military funeral, but still buried as an unknown soldier. And it just so happened, so we got to that point where I still couldn't even draw down a narrow candidate pool. And last year, the decision was made to bury with full military honours that particular unknown serviceman. And I was also going over in that year to undertake ceremonies for headstone investigations that we've previously done. And also I was accompanied by the Jonathan Church award recipients. And for those people who don't know what Jonathan Church Award is, it's the top soldier or top NCO of the year. So 5 of these awards are handed out only, within the Army each year for soldiers and NCOs who have, done some pretty good work. And because of COVID and non-international travel, it had backlogged, and so there was about 15 of these young men and women who were recipients, and they were going to accompany myself and some other UWCA members to, one, give them some professional development, but two, also enhance the ceremonies that we were going to do. And one of the ceremonies we were going to do was actually bury this Australian soldier from Menin Road. So it was pretty moving for me to be involved in the investigation for a few years. And then here I was in Belgium being the master of ceremonies for his burial. And it was, a pretty special time. And then to even add it off, the night before he was buried, we got permission from the Menin Road custodians to lay this soldier in state in the Menin Road Menin Gate Memorial for the last post ceremony, which gets held. So that was pretty moving as well. But it doesn't end there. So we end up burying him as still an unknown Australian soldier. But within the last year and a half, the UWCA has gone into partnership with QUT, Queensland University of Technology, on this DNA innovation hub. So they've been commissioned to assist us with DNA work, and part of that work is with advanced DNA technology. So what we're hoping to get in the near future is some analysis back on that unknown soldier and hopefully we'll get hair color, eye color, skin pigmentation, possibly country of origin. So all those extra bits of information, as you can imagine, will greatly reduce that candidate pool from 1,000 down to hopefully a fairly manageable, number for us to then trace down living family members to get DNA and identify this unknown, Australian soldier. So, I'm hopeful within the next couple of years that that unknown soldier will have a name and we'll be able to go back and change the headstone from unknown Australian soldier to who it was.
And it's amazing the technology and that technology advancement, I assume, has the capability of changing this for possibly hundreds, if not thousands, of Australian service people that have not been yet identified. Definitely. What about do we still use the terminology of missing in action?
No. So I think because we don't, can't speak for the wider community, but we purposely don't use that term because particularly in Europe there are a lot of servicemen who were found during or after the war and were buried, but as an unknown. So, technically they're not missing in action, but they're what we call unrecovered or not in a known grave, which is probably the most correct term to use. So, unrecovered or not in a known grave.
Do we then have any sort of estimate of numbers of Australian service people across all the conflicts since, probably not the Boer War, but since Federation, who are still unidentified or unrecovered?
Yeah, so we've got a great deal of accuracy on those numbers. So it's around 25,000 for all wars, for First World War and Second World War in Korea. We've managed to locate the small number who were missing from the Malay or Vietnam War. There's still 44 missing from Korea, but obviously the vast majority, roughly 22,000 from World War One and 3,000 from World War Two are still without a known grave. So that's a lot, and our work will continue. the reality of it is we'll never identify the whole 25,000, but that's our end game. If we could keep doing it, and that's what we'll do, that every soldier would have a known grave.
So what are some of the other recent recoveries that the unit has been involved in?
This year we've had a few successes. One of the others was the Montevideo Maru, which was that Japanese transport ship, which was carrying 1,000 POWs at the time, mostly of Australian POWs who were captured in Rabaul or New Britain, and it was sunk just off the coast of north of the Philippines in, I think, 1st July 1942. And it was always a great, as you can imagine, it was a great mystery. It wasn't until after the war that the Australians actually knew relatives knew what had happened to that ship, because they weren't able to get any information, obviously, out of the Japanese during the war. But it was in an area where the sea depth, was deeper than what the Titanic is. So, the possibility in those days of ever finding any whereabouts of that ship was next to nothing. But through some tireless work of, I think, a few different organisations and private organisations, and also supported by the UWCA with sort of historical work, this year the Montevideo Maru was actually located just north of the Philippines, and giving some type of solace to those family members who had loved ones on that ship. There's 850 Australians. It was Australia's biggest loss of life, in a single incident during World War II. So that was pretty important. There's been an ongoing project, the Fromell project, which has been ongoing. So, and for about 14 years ago, a mass grave was located through some good work by some private historians just outside of Fromell in a place called Pheasant Wood. 250 Australian soldiers were exhumed from this mass grave, and slowly, one by one, where they can, through DNA and historical research, have been identified. That work is still ongoing, and we won't stop until all 250 have been identified. And only this year, another 5 of those soldiers, taking our total to 173 soldiers, have now been identified from the 250. So it still leaves 77 to go, but we're still going and we're still working on it, and we're still committed that all of those soldiers will hopefully be identified one day. So the last thing that I'd like to talk about was Templeton's Crossing. So that's an area roughly about halfway up the Kokoda Trail, and this year we had another team go up to Templeton's Crossing with mainly our specialists to ensure that temporary cemetery, wartime cemetery, was properly cleared. So most of the servicemen were removed from that temporary wartime cemetery 75 years ago and buried in Bamana. However, sometimes that clearance wasn't always totally successful. So this year we went back there to ensure that the cemetery had been cleared, and during the process was able to locate some additional remains from there to then be transported back, and then again will be interred at Bamana War Cemetery. So yeah, we've had a pretty busy year for a fairly small team of people who are all reservists, who all have outside careers and lives and things like that. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of our team and just how incredibly exciting and rewarding the work is. And in the 27 years I've been in the military, for both regular army and reservists, it's definitely been the highlight of my career, and hopefully I can do it for the rest of my time in the green uniform, if they'll let me.
And where can people go to find out more about the unit?
So we've got the website is in the if you just look up Unrecovered War Casualty Army, it'll take you to the part of the official Australian Army website, and there's different segments. You'll see some different areas about the recent work we've undertaken, but there's also a segment there where if you believe that you have a relative who's still unrecovered from a war, there's some drop-down menus where you can register your name and details, and the unit will get in contact with you. Doesn't mean that we'll always need to get a DNA sample from you, but it's good to know that these people have registered details and we've got them should we need to.
That's the podcast for today. We're keen to hear your feedback by leaving a review on your podcast app, and your reviews helps new listeners find our podcast. You can help support this podcast via Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on our website and Facebook page, and your support helps us with the production of this podcast. We'll be back with you in January 2024. Season's greetings, thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.